Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday Gathering at the Storehouse, our weekly commentary on world events. We first started in 1996 and have become more relevant ever since. Today, posting 2 shows per week to our YouTube channels, BroSal and Philadelphia Church. For 20 years, we have integrated the historical landscape that unfolds daily with the prophetic analysis anticipated by eschatology. We bring you non-traditional insights and uncensored discussion of issues purposely ignored by media of all kinds. Join us now for the only discussion of its kind. And joining me again this week is my son, Tony. Welcome, Tony. What do you have for us?
Good morning, Dad. Thanks for having me on the show. Sorry we missed last week. I had some technical difficulties. My microphone went down, and I had no way to record the show, and where I live is not close to anywhere where I could readily replace it. So now I've got another microphone, and we'll see if we can't make up for last week with something that I think is going to be an amazing journey. I have been doing an inordinate amount of research the last couple of weeks, and I honestly believe I've gotten to the bottom of what's represented in Revelation by the 7-headed dragon, the 7-headed beast, why they're represented that way, and what we're talking about, and also what I'm going to try and do over the next few weeks, I don't know how long it's going to take, is bring it from the ancient understanding that identifies these creatures, these ideas, and these institutions that are being spoken of in Revelation, and right on down to the modern day and how that's being represented in the world. And what is this Antichrist kingdom? That so much of Christianity is popularly blames on the Vatican and the Pope, President Obama being the Antichrist. We've talked about how ridiculous those things are. But now I see why the Pope is the scapegoat for the Antichrist, and nothing could be further from the truth. The Pope might be as confused as every other Christian, and certainly Christianity, I have found out, has been a tool, just as I suspected, since the creation of the National Council on Churches, which was created by these same group of people that we're going to identify as part of this 7-headed dragon and 7-headed beast of today. And so if any of the churches that you go to is affiliated with the National Council of Churches, which is almost all of them, well, that's why your head has been filled with brainwashed garbage. And that's been done on purpose because eventually the people that have the knowledge are going to present the facts that they know Christianity is a perversion of the real truth. And this real truth is held, is protected, if you will, by these secret societies, having to be secret so that the truth isn't lost and destroyed by this perversion known as Christianity. That's their position. And the few that have been chosen or have risen to guide this protecting of the secrets, which come to us as all the rulers of our world, or the people behind the rulers, the string pullers, they refer to themselves as illumined ones, as in Illuminati. But what most of Christianity or anyone knows of the Illuminati is as much propaganda as what they know of their own church or their own government. Now, this past couple of weeks I ran into a gentleman here, an acquaintance of mine, who's been attempting to fight the good fight for some time, especially with regard to pointing out the failings of America's government and why that we're in the position we're in. And he wrote something that he sent me and asked me if I would read it to our listeners, and I promised him I would. So before I get into what I really want to say today, Dad, I want to read this letter because it's where we're going to sort of go with all this to bring it into our world and why we're in a world of essential slavery to a bunch of unseen forces, unseen hands that are pulling the strings, as I'm always trying to point out, because this is what's going to give us some an enlightened view as to the news articles that we read, which I'm more and more convinced. In fact, now I'm absolutely sure that we've been on the right track, Dad, that it's all pure deception. But I've found out that the deception itself is deeper than most people want to understand. That within the deception is deception. It's all a very deep plan that can now be understood. In fact, I'm almost going to go so far as to say that the people who are pulling the strings are finally ready for their plan to be made known, as we read about with Albert Pike's insistence that, or his perspective, that what they're eventually going to do or trying to do is bring the doctrine out into the open, the Luciferian doctrine out into the open, where it can be worshipped not behind the scenes by illumined ones that have been qualified to know the mystery, but everyone can see the truth for what it is. And I'm just going to tell you, the truth is that Christianity is a perversion of the real truth. This is where the seven-headed dragon comes in. So before we get to that now, here's something that comes right into our own world, especially if you're from the United States of America and can't understand why your country seems to make all the wrong decisions, promotes peace, yet is constantly building weapons and going to war. We can take out regimes around the world in which we have supposedly very little intelligence or understanding of their cultures, and yet we can't even get a handle on our own education system, crime, drug use in our own country. No matter how many decades now we declare a war on drugs, nothing ever changes. And so we're going to find out that that's because all of those things are working to plan. Drug abuse in America, the failings of the institutions of marriage and family, and the introduction of the illicitness of sex among minors, pedophilia, pornography. These aren't accidental things from some particular separate organized crime or anything. Like organized crime is organized. It's on purpose. And it's on purpose from the same people that give us presidents, the same people that give us military industrial complexes, the same people that give us educational systems. The same people are in charge of all of these things, and everything is playing its part. And it comes from an ancient idea of order out of chaos. If you create the chaos, then the people look to you to bring the order, since you're the one with the weapons, you're the one in authority, you're the one that can bring them some sort of order. So they create the chaos in order the pretense of their authority to bring order. And it goes back to the Hegelian dialectic of thesis and antithesis and synthesis. Create the problem, offer the solution, and keep control. And so of course the antithesis to created man is evolved man. Which is why even though the people that are in charge are quite a religious group of people, in the sense of they know there's a creator, the secrets that they're protecting, know that there's a real God. They just think that the God we worship through Christianity is a perversion of the real God. But the evolution story was always created by them as the antithesis to the created story to create chaos. The NAACP to supposedly bring equal rights to minorities like African Americans was actually created to stimulate the black-white chaos that we still see in our country. That's all brought to us on purpose. So this is going to come out in our study if you'll stick with me. I'm just throwing out some of the places you can expect us to arrive at in the next few weeks. But for right now, I want to read this letter, as I promised my friend Rafael Rodriguez Migliano, who wrote this letter just recently. It's titled, A Second Open Letter to Members of the U.S. Senate. And I'm going to quote his letter. Now, it's not a long letter, but it's something that Americans and anyone in the supposedly democratic world who thinks that they live under a democracy should understand that even today there's people like Raphael that are still pointing out some of the original problems or original perversions to our Constitution and to the original purpose of self-determination, if we might understand our Constitution as attempting to provide that, and how it is that right from the beginning we've been perverted into the sort of country of slaves that we are, run by a small group of masters. So this is a letter from this year by Rafael Rodriguez Migliano, titled A Second Open Letter to Members of the U.S. Senate. Quote, Warm greetings again, Senator. This communique attempts to exorcise a blasphemous lie that has enslaved the entire world. It recalls Thomas Jefferson's suggestion for authorizing the people that rule over us. He tells humanity of a practice that guarantees to make us free at last. Thank God Almighty, free at last. Same as with the first letter, the details in this one were communicated in a history class lecture orated in the late 1980s by Elaine Clark, now Professor Clark, retired emeritus from the University of Michigan. Miss Clark shared her scholarly knowledge of a Jeffersonian argument for imposing a check on the mandates of a singular majority. According to her, Jefferson thought it a necessity. He argued for balancing the advantages possessed by the largest and most powerful groups toward financing and winning a single popularly held election for a government post. Recalling the lecture, Jefferson favored holding several pre-elections for any government position, a final victor to be selected at random among the pre-selection winners. Quote, to do otherwise would leave no room for the divine hand of providence in the affairs of the state, unquote. Insistently, our nation's great founding statesman, distinguished author of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson's proposal would have checked autocratic rule by any one social class. It affords a chance for a political voice to smaller and financially weaker interest groups. It outlines a process grounded on justice for all. The Founding Fathers of the United States were prestigious members of their respective communities. Under an unchecked majority rule, their election to a political office was almost assured. They had organized and won our War of Independence. They thought of themselves as the most deserving rulers. Jefferson was unable to garner needed support for his altruistic perspective. For the sake of unity, the congressional minutes of the Jeffersonian proposal were sealed to history. Our planet was impoverished with a perverse pattern set for modern democracy. Without Jefferson's recommended check on rulership by the most powerful, wealthy oligarchs guide humanity's future. Crime families win the right to be American royalty. Political prostitutes brought us Vietnam, guns for hostages, cocaine sales to support the Nicaraguan Contra rebels, the 9/11 fiasco, torture at Guantanamo, etc., etc., etc. The criminal class govern our beloved country. Our reality exists between two infinities, the infinitely big and the infinitely small. Everything we use is only employable for a particular task thanks to balance. It has proportions with appropriately adjusted tolerances. Agreed? For government to be a beneficial institution, it has to be non-discriminatory in its selection process. It has to afford a non-partial chance of representation to all the people. For the purpose of imbuing our civilization with good health, longevity, and liberty, Thomas Jefferson recommended authorizing politicians in accordance with nature's intelligent way for making things employable and useful. Reporting for Cosmic Justice, Rafael Rodriguez Migliano. And he's got his email here, but I'm not sure he wants that shared with the general public. So if you write to us, I will forward something on to him and let him give you his personal email if you choose to correspond with him. So that's the letter that he's very recently this year written to the Congress. He's a person who's seeking a change, which now from my perspective, I want to demonstrate that all of these things that he's pointing out are absolutely true, but it demonstrates that they already wanted to keep rulership in what he calls a criminal class, and he's exactly right. From the very beginning, they purposefully rejected Thomas Jefferson's notion that in order to give a voice to the minorities and the people of lesser finances and lesser affluence, that you would have to build into the system their right to be represented rather than the people who have all the money simply buying the representation, and therefore this tiny majority of criminal elite speaking for everyone as if they speak for everyone. And of course, we don't have that in our country. We don't have any representation of the people, and that's becoming more and more clear our entire lives until today. It's become a popular notion of a certain left liberal voice to point out that elections don't matter. And someone that I've been listening to in my research this past couple of weeks pointed out, I think very succinctly, that what it comes down to is we think we have the right of election, but we don't understand that we don't have the right of selection. We don't get to select the people that we then get to elect. And so therefore election doesn't matter because the people that we can elect have been pre-selected for us. So now in the next, I don't know how long it'll take, Dad, couple of 3 weeks, 4 weeks, what I want to do is try and paint the picture of how and why we get to that, because it all ties into the end time prophecies and the end time circumstances that will allow us to read our news articles with some underlying understanding and context. So let's go back now as far as we can to the beginning of what we know as history, which it seems through archaeological exploration takes us to a civilization known as Sumeria. That's about the oldest one that we know that we have artifacts from. These artifacts point to civilizations far older that to the religious, especially the Christian, take you back to pre-Diluvian times, before the flood. But if we just pick it up, for instance, we don't have pieces of the Tower of Babel, so we only know about that from our stories. But we do have our artifacts from the civilization of Sumeria. And in case you're not aware of the land that Sumeria occupied, I'll give you two places of interest that you will recognize. Sumeria encompassed a city called Babylon, and another place called Ur, as in Ur of the Chaldees, that Abraham was called from. So it doesn't seem to me coincidental that we're referring back to ancient Babylon and even the very territory, if not the very society and civilization in which Abraham was called out of. Now, this gives me some real, in my mind, an anchor to what's revealed in Revelation as the beast that was, and why the whore has written on her name, who's writing this beast, Mystery Babylon. Now, people want to identify that with the Catholic Church because certainly these mysteries were incorporated into the Roman Catholic Church. But of course, the Roman Catholic Church did not originate these mysteries. They go back to Babylon, as far as we can tell. And they move from Babylon, where we have the symbols, where we've dug up the symbols of the pyramid, the symbols of the sun worship. We know that those symbols were being used in Sumeria, and then what we find is in Egypt, these symbols and many others are codified into religious dogma, right? What we have from all the hieroglyphs of Egypt, all the writings of Egypt, is a religion. Okay, and this is the religion, I believe, that's being represented by the dragon with 7 heads. And I'm starting to, my instinct, Dad, is that the dragon with 7 heads is in response to the 7 spirits of God that go out into all the world from the throne of God. The devil, the dragon, is responding to each of those spirits, and that's what the 7 heads represent as answers, as responses to those spirit, and then that is then comes out of the sea of peoples, represented as this 7-headed beast, which, Dr. Scott always had seen that this represented Egypt and Medo-Persia, Babylon and Medo-Persia, Syria and Greece and Rome, and so I believe that's all probably very accurate. I believe that you can trace it from this ancient Babylon to Egypt to all these other kingdoms, Assyria, Medo-Persia, Grecia, Rome. They all incorporate this same religion. It's in fact the most successful religion of the earth. And it's still going on today, but it's going on in secret. And the reason it's going on in secret is because a particular Catholic pope in the 12th century, along with King Philip of France, attempted to stomp out this other religion, which is the religion of sun worship, which was also known as the worship of Baal, or Baal, El being God. So when you read in the Bible about Baal worship, I've learned you're reading about this oldest religion in the world that is the worship of the sun, S-U-N, the sun. And it's quite natural, as they explain it in their literature, because of man's humble beginnings. It was easy to see that the sun was the giver of life and the savior of the world. Without the sun, darkness and death was a surety for all life on earth. Now, it's handed down in its deception to us as something that comes out of the evolution of man. Darkest man encountered these things, and that became his symbol. However, I believe what the mysteries teach, when you finally get to that level of being told the mysteries that they're protecting, are the things that were taught to man by these watchers, right? By the sons of God, who forsook their given responsibility by God and fell, as the legend has it, and took to themselves the daughters of women, as Genesis tells it, and also Enoch, and produced these giants that Revelation says were the people of renown of old. That all of this has to do with the secrets that were given by these angelic beings to man, that resulted, as Enoch talks about, in the arts of alchemy, the uses of metal, the arts of war, making of weapons, the arts of agriculture, how to grow things, how to crossbreed things, right? And that this ultimately is what God had to wipe out on the earth through the flood. But of course, these secrets would have remained, whether they were established in some sort of monuments, like the pyramid, if the pyramid was built before the flood. Some of these other pyramids that supposedly have been around thousands of years and perhaps predate the flood. Perhaps they were built by Noah's descendants after the flood. But they contained the secrets of creation. And I'm inclined to think that those secrets were this coming Son of Man. Because he's never called the Son of God until late, mostly in Revelation. He's in the Old Testament, of course, he's referred to as the Son of Man. In Enoch, he's the Son of Man. He's a human that's going to come with the power of God, not a God. And I think all this is on purpose, Dad, because these ancients really believed in gods and the power of gods, and these demigods created by the mating of spiritual beings to human beings. And that was what the power of their ancient world certainly was seen by the human beings. That's why when the tribes finally reached the Jordan to go get the promised land, they said, there's giants over there. We're like grasshoppers to them. I mean, imagine, compare. They didn't just say, hey, we're half their size. We're like grasshoppers to them. So, but in this story, a Son of Man was going to come and fulfill the requirements of redemption and salvation of humankind. Excuse me. And so this seven-headed dragon, to combat that, is going to build into the human psyche, into human history, into the entire human experience, an alternative story. What they now teach among themselves as the real truth that has been perverted by the recognition of Christianity as the actuality of this spiritual happening, that God became a man to redeem mankind. See, the illuminated ones through all time, at least since that story came to be 2,000 years ago, since their knowledge goes back thousands of years before that, they were able to identify this story coming out of this new church of Jesus, these Christians, as being a perversion of the mysteries that were understood, the story that was understood. And it is throughout the world. Throughout the world. I learned this week, or last couple of weeks, Dad, that the Americas, down in Mexico here, these great pyramids, in fact we have one called the Pyramid of the Sun, but the one up in Mexico City that the carbon dating has shown to be some 7,000 to 10,000 years old, long before European influence. They've got an ancient story given to them by some priest that came from the East, who told of the God that dies and raises in 3 days and saves everyone. And this priest, forget his name, I want to study it some more, and we'll come back to some of these things as they bring us into history. But this priest was someone who lived in a life that sounds so much like the first church. Service to others, no claiming any possessions for himself, apparently was able to work miracles. All these things are attributed to this priest thousands of years before Jesus ever came along. So, let me tell you now, and this is just a smattering of things that I've gleaned from what is reported to be the codification, the religious dogma put down all the way in Egypt. Because Egypt, that's why Egypt is so important in the Bible. Egypt is where these prehistoric knowledge that perhaps comes from the God's people themselves and through Sumeria in Babylon becomes now codified into religious dogma. Excuse me. And it today are known as the mystery schools. They were always referred to as the mystery religions. Today they are referred to as the mystery schools. Mystery, if that seems like a coincidence to you, I doubt that it is. Mystery Babylon, written on the whore, riding the seven-headed beast. And that seven-headed beast appears to be this train of mystery schools, mystery religions carried on from the time that it didn't have to be hidden like it does today. It was what was known as the truth. And people like Plato went to Egypt to learn this truth. And so there's always been in these mystery schools the idea that the average man that does not have the time or the inclination or perhaps even the education to attain to the highest understanding was given a more profane understanding. And in this profane understanding, they worshipped the sun. The earliest, most universal symbol of God is in fact the sun, S-U-N, the sun that rises every morning and sets every evening, was what was identified as the Son of God, because this was the representation of life-giving energy, the light of the world that brought life and even knowledge, because without the illumination of things by the sun, nothing could be seen clearly and understood. And this is why the sun carried all these meanings of the truth for the people that understood what the interpretation was. And this is why they hate Christianity, these mystery religions, and why this is the true Antichrist. This is the seven-headed dragon and the seven-headed beast and the whore with mystery written on her forehead, is because they view Christianity as the perversion. And when Christianity came along and became popular, this perversion, through the Catholic Church at some point, the Catholic Church sought to wipe out these mystery religions, and they had to be driven underground. and have since, and even before, I'm going to just read you some of the names that I've come across of these mystery schools, in case any of these are familiar to you. Some of them are ancient, and some are more modern incorporations. The Order of the Quest, Freemasonry, the Ancient Order of the Rose and Cross, the Knights Templar, the Sovereign and Military Order of the Knights of Malta, the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, the Priory de Zion, the Thule or Thule Society, the Jason Society, Illuminati, the Skull and Bones, the Russell Trust, the Brotherhood of the Snake, the Scroll and Key, and many, many, many more. These are all fraternal organizations that were organized so that the truth would not be conquered by the lie. Okay? Now, let me give you, what I'm going to read to you, I want you to know that this is what the mystery schools teach as being verifiable as to the ancient Egyptian religious understanding. This was what was already being taught in Egypt thousands of years ago. This is not something someone thought of recently or since Christianity. This is what was being taught thousands of years before Christ ever arrived in history. That God's Son, and everywhere that you hear me now as I go through this smattering of examples, everywhere I say God's Son or the Son, I'm speaking of S-U-N, the orb of light and heat that flies through the heavens. That's God's Son, according to the mystery religions, not a human being. That's the perversion that they feel needs to be stamped out before it stamps them out. That's the war that's been going on now since about, well, at least the 12th century, when it was officially declared by the Pope of Rome to be a war on this mystery religion that worshiped the Son, even though, of course, the Catholic Church had already incorporated all of these pagan symbols because the pagans were sun worshipers, because sun worship was the truth. It was the oldest and most verifiable power and truth known by all humanity for all time. And like I said, it can be seen that it was already in Mexico, it was in the Americas, it was all over the world long before Jesus ever arrived. Okay, so God's Son, the light, the morning star. The morning star isn't Venus. The morning star isn't what we call a star. The morning star is the sun, traditionally. Again, what I'm telling you is not what I believe or what I think is the interpretation. This is what is taught through the mystery schools as what was always being taught or what was dogmatized in Egypt thousands of years ago. So God's Son, the light of the world, the morning star, brought life, security, and existence to the planet, to all creatures, including men. God's Son lives in heaven and represents the unseen Father in the way an earthly child is in the image of his Father. Therefore, if you have seen the Son, S-U-N, you have seen the Father. The Father is glorified in his Son. God's Son is the giver of life and the Savior of man, and must die to live again, must rise from the dead in order to save man. The Son of God gives life everlasting. And so it was said in Egypt that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that the earth might have everlasting life. Therefore all things foul to man, or evil, are the, quote, works of darkness, when the light of truth is absence. Light equals truth to the ancient Egyptian and brings peace. So the sun is the prince of peace, and likewise evil is from the darkness and is presided over by a prince of darkness, or the devil. The Son of God, therefore, is the way, the truth, and the light. And we should thank God for giving us His Son, which is why it's the tranquility that we receive in life, any tranquility, has been referred to as solace, as in S-O-L, soul, solace from the Son. Now, the metaphysical understanding for these illumined ones was not to worship. Apparently this is quite verifiable, that only the profane worshipped the actual orb in the sky as God. The priests, the givers of the mysteries, the keepers of the mysteries, never worshipped the orb in the sky. Their metaphysical understanding is that there is a God, a creator, who's represented by the sun as the light and truth and life. And there is an adversary represented by the darkness as falsehood and ignorance and death. Now, from the time of Egypt and spreading to all societies around the world, represent the early morning sun, the newly risen sun, the Savior of the world, symbolized as a newborn babe in its mother's arms. Right? Christianity, Catholicism didn't invent that. That was ancient symbolism of the newly risen Son, the Savior of the world. In Egypt, that babe is called Horus, which we'll get into here. Now, Horus, again, this is their symbol of the newly risen Son that brings life. In this Trinity that they understand quite clearly, the Trinity was never a mystery to them. It represents the Son being born from the darkness, bringing life, rising to its zenith in the middle of the day, and then dying every night to rise again. So the rising to a height and falling to its death to rise again represented the Trinity of God's existence. And in Egypt, these were represented by Osiris, the sun at its height, and Horus as the newborn son, the babe in the mother's arms. Now, in Egypt, the dove was the bringer of peace, the hawk, the bringer of war to punish the enemies of truth and light. And I'm going to try and relate this, Dad, to some of our modern symbolism. I'm trying to get there today to bridge a big space, and then we're going to go in and try and illuminate some of the history and the details. But just understand that this is all ancient stuff, long before Christianity. And again, it's going to become clear, I hope, as it has to me, that it's no accident that today we still represent in our political system the doves and the hawks. And why the hawks have a war machine? Because they're there to punish the enemies of truth and light. Which, of course, don't misunderstand that. It's not in a direct way. It's in a grand scheme to eradicate this darkness from the world, which we know as Christianity. That's what the war machine has always been developed to do. Horus is risen. Horus risen. From what this, I'm not sure about this fact, Dad, but I came across it, so I'm going to repeat it. If anyone knows that it's not true, you can point it out. But it has been said that the word hallelujah literally means, or is a recognition of, Horus is risen. That's why we get the hallelujah, because if the sun doesn't come up, we all die. The earth doesn't go on. God would destroy the earth. But instead, he sends his son. His son rises from the dead, and his rising from the dead brings us life. So, hallelujah, Horus is risen. And it's also apparently why we call the horizon as such, because it's from the horizon that we see Horus risen. Horus's life was divided into 12 parts, or the 12 Horus hours of the daylight for the most part. We're going to get into the dividing of the heavenly realm in which Horus, the risen sun, walks across the sky in his heavenly realm, or in other such Egyptian understandings, moves across the sky in his boat known as Isis, and is responsible for the storms that we see in life. And so it is also said that God's Son, while in his boat, calms the storms. So you're probably seeing some reflection on what we've learned as our Christian relation to these things. All right? And it just keeps going and going and going. One of the important things you're going to see is that, as I say, to these people who understand the mysteries, Dad, there is an evil force. In Egypt, it was known as Set, or also sometimes Typhon. Set is the evil brother of God's Son, the prince of darkness who kills God's Son at what we're told in our Christian Bible, God dies at sunset, right? And we understand that to be the Jews didn't want him to die on the Passover, so they wanted to kill him before sunset. But it just so happens the Egyptians had always said that the enemy of God's Son kills him at sunset, and the evil brother's name is Set. But God's Son will return, as we've seen him go, on a cloud, and every eye will see him. Now, in the deeper understanding, it's in our own minds that they taught that we accept or deny the light of truth, and therefore the Son of God. And by denying the light of truth, we subject all of creation to darkness and put to death God's Son at the place of the skull, where our mind resides. And this is where we get, they claim, our Christian tradition of God dying at the place of the skull. The mind, meanwhile, is always surrounded by the two thieves, regret of the past and fear of the future, which is where we get that symbolism, according to them. And it prompted me to ask, is this why the Old Testament prophets refer to this coming Savior as the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, not the Son of God? Because the Son of God was already well known to be the S-U-N of God. But the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world, puts a different twist on it, doesn't it? Nothing in their understanding about a lamb. But let's get back to their understanding. So God's Son goes to his death wearing a corona, or crown of thorns, which is why all kings are crowned with a crown of thorns representing God's authority, why the Statue of Liberty wears a crown of thorns. At high noon in ancient Egypt, when the pyramid cast no shadow, prayers were then offered to the Most High God. And every ancient culture all over the world tracked the movements of the sun on sundials. And so it seems to me pretty clear that what these people were carrying was some secret knowledge handed down from the watchers of Noah's time, if not embodied in Noah's children, and then perverted from that moment onward. We have to. There's not much evidence of any of that, but we can keep sort of sussing out the possibilities. For instance, the Great Pyramid is where these people, that's why the pyramid's on our dollar, why the pyramid is all over the world as a symbol, is because to these ancient Egyptians, see, they didn't build the Great Pyramid. They built about 17 or 18 pyramids around it, none of which ever came close to achieving what the Great Pyramid achieved. And when you read in Isaiah that God left a sign and a witness at the middle of the land of Egypt and at the border, I have to believe that pyramid wasn't built by these perverted religion. That was God's embodiment of the truth, and that's why they went there to get their power and their knowledge. And I say that knowledge is the fact of God's redeeming the world through his Son, S-O-N, Son of Man, Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world, and that was then, through this seven-headed dragon, turned into their temple and their base of knowledge to present the S-U-N, Son of God, and to preempt all of the story that was already told, already known, and preempt it with a alternative story, which as it comes down through time, taught in the mystery schools to the initiates to carry on, would eventually be the alternative to do battle with the saints of the Most High, to refer it back to Revelation. Why this beast does battle with the saints? Because this beast is the alternative story, that the Son of God represents knowledge, S-U-N, the Son. It represents the intellect that God gave man, the knowledge of good and evil, that he might become like God. And that Lucifer was God's agent to free man from the binds of slavery, and that this Jesus story is the darkness meant to keep men bound in ignorance, that Lucifer attempted, or that what God was doing was freeing man by providing for them the knowledge of good and evil. If you start to see how these are the only two real stories in the world. Now, the study of the sun on their sundials, or I might say the verification of their secret knowledge, verified that there are 4 seasons indicated as the sun moves across the sky, and those have always been known as the cross of the zodiac, because if you take a circle representing the entire year and the degrees that go around the entire year, the 360 degrees, and you put a cross through that circle, what you find is that cross intersects both the solstices and the equinoxes, the longest and shortest days, and the 2 days, pardon me, that the sun crosses the equator and are the most equal. And that is why the sun indicates 4 seasons at each of these points of this cross, and why that was always known as the cross of the zodiac, and why the life of God's Son is displayed on the cross, and why the Son's death from December 22nd through the 24th is witnessed in the star constellation known as the Southern Cross, and therefore God's Son dies on the cross. And why we get December 25th as the birth of God's Son, because it always has been God's S-U-N, Son, and of course pagans and sun worshippers continue to worship the birth of God's Son on December 25th, and so do Christians. But that's the reason it's December 25th, is because if you study the sundial, what you realize is the sun gets to a point on December 22nd when the shadow does not move. It stays absolutely still for 3 days and nights, December 22nd, December 23rd, December 24th, and then it moves a degree again on December 25th. It comes back to life. God's Son dies for 3 days and then comes back to life on December 25th. Now, Tertullian and other church fathers stated that because the sun makes 4 seasons in the sky, this is why there are 4 Gospels. Okay? And that this is why the Last Supper depicts the 12 apostles in 4 groups of 3 surrounding the Son of God. And the 12 signs of the zodiac, as were observed also in this observation of the heavens, it's because there's 12 signs, which in the Egyptian understanding are the 12 helpers of the Son of God. That's why we get 12 apostles. That's why there's 12 patriarchs of Israel. That's why there's 12 months of the year. That's why there's 12 brothers of Joseph, 12 judges, 12 prophets. All reflects the ancient Egyptian understanding of 12 helpers to the Son of God. Pardon me. And why in the heavenly world the astronomers of Babylon realized that there's 12 what they called houses that the sun moves through. The 12 houses that we know as the zodiac: Aries the ram, Taurus the bull, Gemini the twins, Cancer the crab, Leo the lion, Virgo the virgin, Libra the scale, Scorpio the scorpion, Sagittarius the archer, Capricorn the he-goat, Aquarius the man with the water pitcher, and Pisces the 2 fish. Now, interestingly, as we are going to find out when we start studying the people that are carrying these mysteries today and why their symbols are the way they are, it was noticed that the sun enters each of these houses at the 30th degree and leaves at the 33rd degree. I'll just leave that for the moment, but it's going to become important to us. And also why the age of Pisces changing to the age of Aquarius has such significance for these people who worship the sun as the representation of God, and the movements of the sun through the houses as the representation of the truth of God's revelation to mankind. Why that's so important to them. Now, it's been known for some time that after the year 2010, the age of Aquarius would be in the age of Aquarius, and that God's Son, that's why God sent his apostles in our story, our perverted version of this, Christians, as they say, why Jesus sent his servants to inform the man with the water pitcher that he would be coming to his house, because the Son of God will be leaving the house of Pisces, the fish, and entering the house of the man with the water pitcher. And why we hear that in my Father's heavenly abode are many houses that we call mansions, but it comes from the fact that in God's heavenly abode are 12 of these houses. Now for them, the last days, as we refer to it in our scripture, has got nothing to do with the end of God's rope that he's given man to sin and hang himself with. It's the last days of this age of Pisces being projected, and that the end of the world is actually the end of an aeon in Greek, which means age. So it's always was talked about that it was the end of the age in which God's Son was going to come again and into a new kingdom. So the New Age religion is all based on that the actual God, who's been projecting these actual things all the way back from prehistoric times, has been pointing out that the real God will be returning to his new kingdom in this new age, the age of Aquarius. But of course that God isn't Jesus. This story that we know of Jesus is the perversion of that truth. And I keep repeating that so you realize who this dragon is, who the real enemy is, and what it's really about. They have to stomp out Christianity because Christianity is the darkness, led by the prince of darkness to deceive and destroy man and keep him from the knowledge of good and evil and becoming like God. So the mystery schools view Christianity as a perversion of their religion. And that religion is embodied in what has always been referred to as the Old World Order of Europe. That's where the power came to embody this Christianity, since that old world was dominated for 1,500 years and essentially still going by that Christianity through what rose up as now we call the Catholic Church, which is why I tell you, the Catholic Church is being served up, Dad, as the scapegoat for all this, because they're the only ones that at least are still within all the mixing of symbolism, which how could that help but happening, since the symbolism was already there long before Christianity got there. Christianity didn't invent the dying God that raises in 3 days. Christianity didn't invent the man with the water pitcher. This is the deeper thing that's going on, and why these other people who know these mysteries and are brought up to understand that Christianity is a perversion see the old world order as the threat, and why a new world order based on the knowledge of the ancient knowledge embodied in the pyramid, and why the pyramid is on our dollar, because the new world order is going to replace the old world order, and it will be the new age religion, in which the Luciferian doctrine of truth, that Lucifer set us free from the bondage of ignorance, and that has been fighting to, these secret societies have been fighting to keep that knowledge from being stomped out by the old world order provided over by the darkness of Catholicism, otherwise known as Christianity. Okay, now, in ancient Egypt, just for a few more little things before I try and bring us forward a little bit. In ancient Egypt, the sun, S-U-N, was said to walk on the water, because it's very easy to see that sunrise and sunset times on any body of water, the shimmering sun appears to walk across the water. The sun, as we said, was responsible for the weather and therefore calms the storms or sends the storms on enemies, and was also said to cross the heavens in a boat. And that boat is known as Isis, which we'll get into more in the coming weeks, where this Isis really comes from. So, in that way, as I said, our Christian understanding is simply a liturgical perversion of what was always known in ancient Egypt, that the Son of God crosses the heavens in a boat, calms the storms, and walks on water. Now, one other thing here seems kind of important. I'm jumping around a little because I got a lot of notes. In ancient times, possibly even in pre-Egyptian times, there was something known as the marriage feast of Canaan. Now, Canaan is that land that would be given to Israel. It's what we call modern Israel today. From where the Gaza Strip is up through the Lebanon and Syria and over to the Jordan River. And this was the ancient land of Canaan. And every spring, according to what I've uncovered, there was a feast in the spring to celebrate the fact that the Father in heaven fertilizes Mother Earth to bring forth life in the spring, God's Son turning the life-giving rainwater to wine for the celebration. Isn't that interesting? The marriage feast. And that's where we Christians get, again, the perverted marriage feast of Canaan that Jesus turned water into wine. Now, again, this isn't what I believe. I'm going to tell you right now that what I want you to see is either they're right, because this is history. All of our Christian, paraphernalia, if you will, has been prefigured through all time. None of it's original. So that says to me that either they're right, and Christianity is simply a perversion. It's just one more way that a particular culture decided to embody these truths by presenting them as taking place in an actual personage, excuse me. However, they were simply drawing from all the actual knowledge about the real God and projecting it onto a personage rather than the Son. But that's all Christianity amounts to. My personal vision is that the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world means that that is the knowledge that was already known before it ever arrived. The secret, that the mystery religions think they know, was the one that there would eventually come a Son of Man that would fulfill all these things. The 3 days and nights in the tomb, walking on water, saving mankind, born of a virgin. All the tenets of Christianity in a physical representation as a lamb slain were things that were incorporated into such things as the Great Pyramid and the knowledge, the secrets, which weren't secrets at the time. It was the ancient knowledge that was before the foundation of the world. Enoch writes about it, and I've come to see the Ethiopian book of Enoch as something that I can't find refutation for. I believe that there's some, I don't know where that got corrupted, but it sure is an amazing account and seems authentic, and it jibes with this idea that that Great Pyramid wasn't built by the Egyptians, it was built by somebody else with knowledge. And if our story is true about fallen angels, watchers that taught the daughters of men, or took daughters of men and taught the secrets to mankind of warfare and such, well, it makes a lot of sense now that what was always known is the story of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And once the dragon had influence over history of the world, once the prince of the power of the air, as we know him, became the power of this world, that story was then turned into the story about the sun, the reflection of the heavens. Because what does God say? The heavens tell the story, right? The stars are there for a sign and for a witness. Now, this is what they knew. They knew that that was the case. And they knew that those signs and those witnesses told the story. And I don't imagine for a minute that Noah and his sons didn't know exactly what story it told. But how many generations would it take under the influence of the evil one, as we call him, to pervert that story into the worship of the sun, S-U-N, so that when the S-O-N, Son of Man, Son of God, arrived in physical history thousands of years later, there would already be an alternative story so pervasive that there was no way that story could be seen as original. And therefore, when it came the end of the age, the end of time, the time for Lucifer to bring the real truth, the knowledge of good and evil into the open, this Christian story, the embodied true story of God, could be presented as the false story and the one that needed to be stomped out, because that's the story that leads to ignorance and death. Whereas the knowledge of good and evil, the knowledge given by Lucifer, leads man to freedom and intelligence and life everlasting. That's been the lie from the garden, right? So this is the way I see it. Now, how do we find the evidence in our world? All right? Who's carrying these mysteries? Well, we have, Freemasonry is the short answer. Freemasonry, not in the sense that all Masons, in fact, only a tiny, tiny, tiny number of Masons know what Masonry is holding on to, the mystery, the secret. And it's called the lost word of Freemasonry. Now, the Freemasons' truth never enters until the 30th degree. Just like, as we said, the sun enters the house at the 30th degree and departs at the 33rd. So for the Freemasons, the truth is finally revealed when a person reaches the 30th degree. They find out, I'm not sure what truth, because they don't really give that away, and I don't trust the people that believe that they've got all the truths of Freemasonry. We have to put that together based on what they do say about themselves, and what we can piece together is these mysteries that they're carrying on from Egypt, is this sun worship and the rituals that they do go through and the blood oaths that they go through. But anyway, it's just part of our evidence at this point that we're going to be studying Freemasonry, because they happen to have these symbols that come from Egypt. They happen to have this sort of system in which initiates are brought in under the guise of Christianity, the thing they want to stomp out. And as you reach their 30th degree and on to the 33rd, their highest degree, because nothing can be higher than the sun, S-U-N, you find out that the truth is that they're guarding the truth, which is the Luciferian doctrine. And this is also why the snake, the serpent, is a symbol of knowledge all through ancient times, and why it's on the medical, the symbol of the medical staff, the staff of Moses that turns into a snake, or Pharaoh, because the serpent is seen as knowledge, and that's why, in their story, God, Lucifer, sent the serpent to enlighten mankind, because the serpent is the symbol of knowledge, and the boat known as Isis, that the sun traverses the heavens, is a boat in the form of a serpent. So you got to remember, and that's why in the Chinese, a dragon also, and the dragon with 7 heads might be literally seen to people that understand the symbols of mysteries as the knowledge of 7 heads, like God's 7 spirits. This is the 7 heads of the dragon, which wouldn't be seen as evil to them, but as the keepers of knowledge. Okay? So now I want to talk a little bit about, and I haven't even hit all of these Egyptian things. Horus in Egypt was also known as the Logos, the Word. Right? They grabbed that term and made it their own, and was seen as the Logos that was made flesh to dwell among us. The one, S-U-N, Son that we have to save us. The only begotten, S-U-N, Son of the Father. But see, this Logos was lost. And this is what symbolizes, we'll get into more when we start talking about Freemasonry now, the phallus of Osiris, the obelisk that you see in Washington, D.C., that you see in the courtyard of the Vatican, that you see everywhere in Dealey Plaza where JFK was assassinated. This, in their legend, is known as the lost word of Freemasonry. And maybe next week we'll get into some of that. I want to go somewhere else today. And where I want to go is in giving a little evidence as to how it is involved in our world today, that we can sort of verify this kind of context of what I'm saying. And what I think it's really embodied in most surely is the symbolism. And as I've been learning, these ancient symbols, many of which are Sumerian or pre-Sumerian, because apparently what we find in Sumeria is the universal use of something that they perhaps have received from before. Now, symbols are like an alphabet, like letters. A letter, like A, B, C, are simply symbols. And those letters, when stacked together into things like words or sentences, tell a story greater than themselves. Similarly, these symbols, if you know what they mean, like the serpent or the dragon or the pyramid or the phallus of Osiris or the sun or the corona, the crown of thorns, those also tell a story if you know what the symbols mean. Now, this is what these mystery schools and why we're going to look into things like Freemasonry to be the carrier of these ancient Egyptian knowledge, because they carry the ancient Egyptian symbols. And so what are they trying to say to us? Well, I've just showed you what the Egyptian religion was, and this is what they're saying. Christianity is a perversion because, look, everything the Christians are trying to point out happened with Jesus was something that was already the known religion about the Son, S-U-N, of God. And, you know, Dad, remember when I asked, after I learned that Jesus is not a Hebrew name. There are no Hebrews named Jesus, even today. Never in history. Jesus is not a Hebrew name. And we said, where does that come from? How did Yeshua, Joshua, become Jesus? And I'm surprised, this is how I know nobody in our audience really understands this. I certainly didn't until recently, as I'm studying these symbols of the ancient religions. And what I find is ISIS, and this is another, we'll open this can of worms pretty soon, is you think it's a coincidence that this final force that they've risen up to bring us to the final World War III that's going to end in being able to bring about the Luciferian doctrine into the open. There's a reason that it's called ISIS. We're going to get into that in the next couple of weeks, but I'll just tell you that Jesus is nothing more than Isis, because in the Latin time of the Romans, I and J were interchangeable letters. And that's where Isis becomes Jesus. So it's all part of the paganization of our religion through the worship of the sun, the mitre hat on the Pope, all of the ways in which what everyone always knew was true was bound to this new explanation of an actual man named Joshua from Palestine that supposedly is the representation of these symbols in reality. You see how easy, I start to see how easy it was for the quote-unquote church to incorporate these symbols, because these were the symbols that everyone already knew represented the living and dying God, the sacrifice, the salvation, the crown of thorns. That was already for thousands of years. So to simply call this son Isis, he was already known as Isis, and in the Roman world, Jesus is Isis, and so that is where we get Jesus. So that's why we celebrate the birth of Jesus on December 25th. Okay, so here's a few other little interesting tidbits. We start this country with the idea of the separation of church and state, which is not true at all. That's simply a fallacy. Little things that point that out, and there's many, many, many that I just can't go over but in such a short time. But the pharaohs and Caesars of their time thought of themselves as both the political and religious leader, and in fact demigods, if not the representation of God on earth, just like a pope. And because we don't imagine we have that in our system today, it's only because we have puppets that carry the symbols. And the interesting thing is, the black robe on the clergy that you watch our leaders wear when they go to things like the Bohemian Grove, or you watch our leaders and initiates wear when they come up through secret societies like the Skull and Bones or the Masonic orders, are nothing more than the black robe worn by the priests of the understanding of Saturnalia, the worship of Saturn, which I haven't fully been exposed to how that fits into the worship of the sun. Perhaps it's the dark arts of magic. I'm getting there. I think it has to do with the dark arts of magic, which were always believed through history and still are by the people who know the mysteries. That's why they feed their babies to Moloch, the sun god, because it does bring some sort of power. That's why alchemy, the changing of metals into gold, was a symbol for the ability to alter states of kind, alter physical reality based on spiritual understandings like water to wine. Okay, so this was practiced over by the priests, and that's where we get our wedding ring from. I've always wondered that. First of all, we've pointed out, Dad, in the scripture, only, polygamy was obviously accepted in the early church because it was only deacons and leaders of the church that were asked to have but one wife. And nowhere do we read in our scriptures anything about wedding rings, as some sort of ceremony, put a wedding ring on. We accept that as some sort of Christian thing, but really that's worship of Saturn. The rings of Saturn, that represented the ring of Saturn, and apparently, from what I've learned or heard, that's why women wear earrings. It represented the submission to the priests of Saturn. And this is why in that world there was 3 tiers that the priests of Saturn sat up above the people on 3 tiers, which are represented by the first 3 degrees in Masonry today. And still today, our judges wear a black robe and sit on a tiered bench above the people. And there's a fence or a gate that separates the non-initiate or non-priest from the priestly class. And that's why the people cannot go through that fence or gate in a court of law in our world, but the attorneys can, see, because they've been initiated. They are actually priests working for the priests. That's why there is no separation of church and state. We pretend that, but in fact, everything still operates on the same basis. That's why both judges and graduates from college wear the black robe. The graduates wear the square of masonry on their head, and they've been, in their symbology, seen to have been now, they are trained in the priesthood. So if you're an alumni, you have been illuminated. You know whose butt to kiss and when. You are part of the priesthood in their symbolic version. Right? Don't believe that? Okay. How about order out of chaos, the ancient term? Look at, I'm going to bring your attention real quick because I think this is kind of fun. We'll go into the Washington Monument and the Pentagon and the dollar bill and all the occult symbolism in our country another time. But let's just look at something that's more fun that I learned, and I thought, wow, this is kind of cool, interesting info. In ancient England, the Celtic Druids, where Merlin comes from, the magician, the sorcerer, where magic comes from, they always, Merlin, the Druid priest, the magicians, used a magic wand to cast their spells. And that magic wand, strangely enough, was made out of holly wood, the wood from the holly tree. And that is why our sorcerers that work their magic to enchant the world into the deception and to teach the truths through magic symbolism is called Hollywood. And why that's all that comes out of Hollywood is the magic of these people, and why there's no Christianity actually produced in Hollywood, but only pseudo-Christianity to present Christianity as the great deception. But so look at a couple of these things. For instance, people remember the show Get Smart. That simple little fun crime adventure comedy when I was young. Get Smart, if you remember. Of course, Get Smart is a term that means sort of wake up, see the light, get smart. And in Get Smart, what you had was the bad guys known as chaos and the good guys known as control, right? Because Get Smart, they use chaos to create control. Okay, that's just one little one. How about the movie Frankenstein from 1933, where Boris Karloff comes out and announces that this is a story about a crazy scientist from Bavaria. Well, it just turns out that Bavaria was the origin of the Illuminati in 1776. Adam Weishaupt being the crazy scientist alluded to, who was putting together a monster out of various pieces to scare the world with. Various pieces such as Zionism, extremism, communism, right? These were the pieces being put together at the time to give us the scare of Hollywood, or Frankenstein from out of Hollywood. See, these are all things they know exactly what they're saying. Star Wars, the cosmic battle of good and evil. Luke Skywalker, because in ancient Egypt it was said the sun walks across the sky. And this one blew me away, that in the works of the Knight Templar, ancient works, they have something known as a Jedi Knight, whose name is Yoda. And if you look at these old works, there's caricatures of Yoda as a little sort of monster with pointy ears. So if you think Hollywood invented Yoda, you're wrong. And the Empire Strikes Back is why New York, known as the Empire State, where the United Nations was formed to create the New World Order by the people that have all the power. That's what that all really refers to. So this is just to strike your interest. We haven't even begun to get into the connecting the dots of, there's dots that connect us all the way back from the Egyptian mysteries, all the way back from the way it was incorporated into the Roman Catholic Church, to why the Roman Catholic Church is actually the enemy of these people as the keeper of the old world order, why they've had to be infiltrated, and why, as a representation of Christianity, they must go, whether they become the New Age religion, or more likely are simply destroyed to make way for the New Age religion. That's what World War III is really about. It's got nothing to do with oil pipelines, really. Got nothing to do with international banking, really. Because what we're going to find is all these countries that don't have the international banks and that are appearing to fight against them have all been set up long, long before any of these modern supposed confrontations existed. In fact, the modern supposed confrontations were set up on purpose and are orchestrated with severity and precision to bring about the very nature of our society and the wars that we're fighting today. And in fact, what I've learned is that if you think anything you're seeing in the paper is an accident, if you think that our Pentagon and our policymakers are making mistakes, you're wrong. There's a reason that these people do everything, and that reason is because they have a plan that's been around a long time, at least since the late 18th century, when this Frankenstein was formed to achieve this plan. That's where the mystery religions became a force for this new world order in which they were going to finally bring out the truth into the open. That's been going on for about 250 years now as its own determined effort. Excuse me. And there are so many dots to connect it right up to today through all the historical people we're aware of and all the historical organizations we're aware of, and an absolute method to see each dot connected to the next, right down from the destruction of the Knights Templars on November 22nd in the 12th century, Friday the 13th, which is why we get unlucky Friday the 13th, because it's unlucky. It was the day the Roman Catholics and the Old World Order tried to stomp out the mystery religion and the truth, the light carried on by the mystery religions. So this is what's really going on today. And I'm sorry if I didn't get to talk about news articles, but once you know what is coming, the news just becomes reading their fictionalized, perverse stories about the evils they're working to bring about the war that they need to get humanity, the planet, into the position that they've been manipulating it toward for at least in concert the last 250 years. So that's why when I talk about the last 100 years, we're really right in the last phase of it for 100 years. And now today, I think that's why they're allowing more and more information like this to even come about, because they know that it's all going to come out into the open soon. And they're already sort of feeding the population. They've made Christianity enough of a profanity to the world that they can start introducing to us the fact that Christianity is a profanity. It really is just a perversion. They're going to cast those doubts even in the mind of Christians, which is why, as I said, the National Council on Churches, starting as the Federal Council on Churches, was formed for that very reason, to start the preparation for people that think they believe in Jesus to understand that they've been duped, so that they might become part of the new world order and ready to support the outlawing and complete destruction of Christianity from the earth. That's what the seven-headed dragon's doing. That's what the seven-headed beast has always been around to do. That's what the Antichrist really is. And it does tie into the temple and the Jewish worship, because I'm going to have to wait. I'll just leave you hanging there because I'm going too long today, Dad. But we'll get into now all the way these strings tie together. But if you want to know the whole story and why poor Thomas Jefferson, if indeed he was a function for actual altruism and not just a sort of another scheme, another fly in the ointment, I'm not sure, but I like the way Raphael, his expression that he's trying to draw is that, this guy was already trying to point out how we could keep a small group. And what I've learned in the battle that's gone on in America with these people shows how what we read a few weeks ago, the guy that did the Albert Pike summation, pointed out that America was founded by, quote, good Masons. And I'm not sure that's true. However, it seems to be quite true that there were very many early Americans that fought even to the death against the introduction of these people, the Illuminati, the Freemasonry that was trying to create a one world order and to undermine Christianity and to undermine the government, that there actually was American, what you might call patriots or heroes, that really did believe in this idea of a truly free nation, a self-governing nation that could get away from what they saw going on in the European undermining of Christianity that had been going on now, like I say, for at least 1,000 years, right? Or nearly, since the 13th century, when the Templars were attempting to use their influence, their banking influence, and take over Europe. And when Philip, the King of France, found out about it, he notified Pope Clement, and they decided, let's round up these Templars all over the world. And they tried to, all over Europe, but they were unsuccessful because people like the King of England were already being influenced by the Templars, since the Templars had all the money and appeared to have this secret knowledge. So there's a lot for us to explore, Dad, about what is this secret knowledge and how verifiable. Why the pyramid of Egypt? Why all these symbols were so important to them and still are today as what they envision as the real truth that Christianity is the perversion of. Remember, that's what's really going on. These people don't consider Christianity just too good, and they don't want freedom. They just want communism, as I hear a lot of the people that don't seem to understand the deeper thing going on. Communism was always a tool to be used. The goal isn't communism, as some people imagine. Communism, as Albert Pike said, is to be wiped out along with Christianity. Atheism and Christianity, Zionism and radical Islam, all of these non-truths that they've developed to create the chaos so that they could remain in control. So anyway, thanks for having me, Dad. I'm really looking forward to this study and how it fits into our misunderstanding of the rapture as we'll continue to go through on the Bible study. But in the Sunday show now, I really think this is the best education we can give ourselves. This is the truth. This is what's really going on behind the scenes and why strings are being pulled. We've been examining how it's obvious Russia's strings are being pulled. Now we're going to get to learn who exactly is pulling those strings. Thanks for having me, Dad. Talk to you next week.
Well, Tony, I think you're exactly right. And it was another superb analysis. And folks, I hope you enjoyed the show today. And give us a little feedback. Go to BroSal.org on YouTube or the Philadelphian Church on YouTube. And comment. Drop us a line. Subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing and you want this to continue, drop us a frankincense offering. There's a button right up on the right-hand corner of the title to keep this ministry and the word coming to you. And for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Till next week, we want you to have a great day in Christ. Thank you.